US and China trying to leverage each other's power?
The relations are definitely not normal, but the two also understand that they need each other.
What, according to you, is that fundamental reason?
Very often when we talk of India-China relations, it's reduced to the boundary dispute. But as you said, there's a weaponization of the Brahmaputra waters. There are weather modification systems on the Tibetan plateau which will have implications for India. There's cyber warfare, there's espionage, there's disinformation. You name it and you have it. The fundamental reason lies in China's perception of India.
What are the triggers that China has imposed on India?
There's a series of events which have happened.
In the world of geopolitics, it is crucial to understand your neighbor, especially a neighbor like China, who poses a new threat almost every day. There aren't many people who really understand China as a nation. One such individual is Dr. Sriparna Pathak, who is currently the Associate Professor at Jindal University and has also been a consultant to the Ministry of External Affairs and seldom a part of a lot of track 2 dialogues with China. She brings with her a wealth of experience and insights on the fundamental problems that India faces with China, and together we cover a lot of subjects and stories. Stay tuned for a very critical conversation on the subject of Indo-China relations with Dr. Sriparna Pathak. Before we start today's conversation, I've got one request. If you ever enjoyed the videos or found any value out of it, please subscribe to it. It really helps us as a channel to improve our content and bring better guests. Thank you again and enjoy the rest of the video. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Shivam. It's wonderful always to talk to you and I look forward to another interesting chat.
I want to begin this conversation with a personal question and understand from you where your interest in China arose.
Yeah, it's an interesting question and it's been an interesting journey. 2 reasons. So my master's was in international relations and we could take electives only in the second year. In the first year, as every 21-year-old, I was too enthusiastic and I really liked papers on economics. During the summer break, I went to Dharamshala and McLeodganj. And as I was walking through the streets, I saw a lot of shops which said that we don't sell products made in China. So for me, because I loved economics so much, this didn't make sense because, of course, the seller would be making a profit if you sell Chinese products because economies of scale and so on. So I went to one of the shopkeepers and I asked him that, so why would you not sell Chinese products? Because, they are cheap and you could sell it to us at a higher price. So he said, to answer your question, I'll have to ask you a question. I said, sure. So he said, are you from Dharamshala? I said, no, I live in Delhi, but I'm originally from Jamshedpur in Jharkhand. So he said, Beta, how would you feel if one fine day someone comes and tells you, you cannot leave Delhi and you cannot go back to Jamshedpur to your family and never see your home again? How would you feel? So I laughed. I said, that does not happen. Like, really, that cannot happen. He said, no, what if it does happen? Because it has happened to some of us. I was like, that would be, no. I have to see my parents. I have to see my brother and I have to see my home. I would fight. I would do everything possible to go back. He said, that is exactly what we are doing. Tibet is our home. And we cannot go back to Tibet because China has occupied it. That stayed with me. Then when it came to, pursuing MPhil and PhD, there was another thing which struck me that, okay, India and China both began their developmental journeys largely at the same time. Now my city, Jamshedpur, the steel city of India, has done really well because it led the industrialization process. China adopted a different mechanism for industrialization. How are these processes so different? Why is it that, the Jamshedpur model or the Tata model cannot be used in other parts of India? It cannot be used because it's a democracy and different states have, we follow a federal structure. But that was easy for China. So in my head, it was like, maybe I need to learn more about China's economic experiences so that maybe in some ways I can understand if it can be used in my country. So 2 reasons which made me attracted to understanding China. And because China is at the center of almost everything in international politics, my interest has stayed.
So China is an interesting topic in the world politics at the moment and has been ever since you have been started reading it as well. What do you think has changed over time? Like what kind of mindset of Chinese has changed over time?
You see, especially after 2008, when they held their Beijing Olympics, that was the show of their strength that we have arrived. Because before 2008, things were still very different. Okay, Deng Xiaoping in 1976 started the whole reforms and opening up program, but it took a bit of time. Any reform takes a bit of time.
Definitely.
So after 2008, their power projection started increasing more and more and more. Now, in Deng Xiaoping's time, because China was not powerful, he had said it's very important to hide one's power and bide one's time. But at the 19th Party Congress under Xi Jinping, he made a statement which showed that China has now moved away from hiding its power and biding its time. And it showcased that China is willing to be the leader of the world. He said that developing countries should follow the model of China's economic governance or China's development, clearly showcasing China as the leader. So now there's been a huge change. Now, because of this, autocracy has also increased. Severe controls have also been put in place, and this has been just increasing over the years. Deng Xiaoping, when he came to power, because China was devastated after the Cultural Revolution and Mao Zedong's whole politics in command, Deng Xiaoping was more of a person who was economics in command. Things were loosened a little bit, and bits and pieces of capitalist forces, market forces were allowed to come into the country. But now there's been a sea change because Xi Jinping understands that if China has to project that sort of power, it also has to have absolute control. So internationally, it's become more aggressive. Domestically, also, it's become much more aggressive.
I want to straight away get into the implications on India. And of course, before getting into implications of India, I want to understand from you, because as a seasoned expert in the Chinese studies, there are a lot of threats from China to India. But there must be a fundamental reason for that. What, according to you, is that fundamental reason?
The fundamental reason lies in China's perception of India. Very often when we talk of India-China relations, it's reduced to the boundary dispute. But as you said, there are many more things. There's an economic, there's a trade deficit which we've been suffering for years.
Right.
There's lack of equal market access for Indian products in China. There are tariff and non-tariff barriers against Indian goods. There's a weaponization of the Brahmaputra waters. There are weather modification systems on the Tibetan plateau which will have implications for India. There's cyber warfare, there's espionage, there's disinformation. You name it and you have it. We have all sorts of problems with China. But why is it that we have these problems? There is just one reason. It's a perceptional problem. In the words of Professor Sumit Ganguly, who is one of the biggest sinologists in the world, there's a positional rivalry between India and China. Within Asia, both India and China want to be leaders, but China wants to be the only leader, which is why it would not want to share the leadership with India. We often think boundary dispute is the problem, but the problem arose way before the boundary dispute, back in the 1940s. Indian soldiers, as part of the British Army, were used to quell the Boxer Rebellion in China. Now, China talks about its century of humiliation when these colonizers or imperialists, unleashed humiliation. And Indian soldiers were used to unleash all sorts of atrocities or, quell protests. Logically, it's not like, India was a free country. India was also colonized. India was a part of the British crown. So it's not like our Indian forces did it out of free will.
Right.
But China doesn't see that. It saw India as an extension of the British Empire, even though the empire was ending in the 1940s. They have not been able to get over that, which is why till date you will see this constant tirade that India is a lackey of the West. Mao Zedong had even said, India is like a child tied to the apron strings of its colonial masters. We did not know this, that this is what China thought of us. This is how China perceives us. What did we do? We were the first non-communist country in the world to give recognition to the state of the People's Republic of China. And then we got repaid. And I say repaid with a lot of sarcasm. In 1962, even before 1962, it had happened. Prime Minister Nehru had gone up to Chou Enlai and he showed the maps and he said that, look, why are these maps showing Indian territory as part of Chinese territory? And Chou Enlai, in a very cavalier sort of way, said that, oh, these are old maps, these are KMT maps. So we have not had a chance to relook them, take a look at them and change them. And because we trusted, maybe we were naive, maybe we wanted peace, we accepted that argument. We didn't even challenge that. We didn't do anything. We inherited our borders from the British. We gave up our claim to Tibet. Tibet had an independent existence. The PLA marched into Tibet and, as they say, peacefully liberated it, basically took over Tibet. We never said anything because we wanted to have peace. Maybe the leadership immediately after independence wanted to focus on economic development. Maybe we wanted to have good neighborliness with the Chinese, but the Chinese didn't see it this way because there's a perceptional problem.
Right.
They have never been able to get over the fact that the British Indian Army were used to quell all sorts of protests, rebellion, etc. in China.
That's what has impacted their mindset in terms of how Indians treated them at that moment.
Till date, if you see, you can very well note this sort of a perceptional problem. How many times has China attacked us? 62, 67, 87, Doklam, Galwan, Yangtze, just name it, and just n number of times. China has a problem with 14 countries with regards to land and maritime boundaries. But out of these 14, there's just one which suffers this sort of a tirade from China constantly. There has to be a reason. China gives us diktats very often. Last year it came up with this ridiculous standard map in which it yet again showed Indian territories as its own. It also showed a lot of territories of Southeast Asian countries like Philippines, Vietnam as its own. And the countries were, of course, angered by this ridiculous behavior from China, and all these countries made statements. Russia also did, because they showed Russia's territory also as part of Chinese territory. But they gave a diktat only to India, saying they don't read too much into the map. The signal is very clear that, India can never be an equal partner. You give diktats only to the ones that you think are inferior. Now, China tries to placate India very often, saying that, India and China should cooperate. On March 13th, again, the state-run Global Times had said that we don't want to be in an arms war with India, and we hope that both the sides can cooperate and look forward together. They give these narratives from time to time, placating. Actions don't really match these words, but they do try to placate us. What do they want really from us? For us to be an inferior partner to them under their thumb in their whole tirade with the West. Which is why constantly India is a lackey of the West. Then, it's a hot and cold game. Then, next day there would be like, oh, India and China are Asian brothers. Oh, we have Asian values. Oh, we are post-colonial societies, and so on. It's a perceptional problem.
There could be a reason to their, the activities that they follow, like you said. There could be that they want to portray themselves as superior in the world map and show the world that how they are with India. And on the other hand, they want to keep pinching at us for us to retaliate and do something negative that would showcase the world that, India is the real problem, not China.
China is the better option. So which is why it also keeps talking about South-South cooperation, Global South, post-colonialism. Because if one can use India as a tool, because we are also a post-colonial society and we've suffered the ravages of colonialism for 200 years, yet we don't engage in either moral hectoring, which the West does, or in exploitation economically and militarily the way China does. So if India could be, in one of these camps, be it the Western or the Chinese, then a lot of support from the Global South would come in. Because India's overtures to its neighbors or to its partners or to its friends has never been exploitative. We've never sought anything in return. We've never, siphoned anything off the way China does. Neither do we go and give moral tirades or hectoring the way, a lot of Western countries do. So China would want India in its camp, but only to suit its own interests.
Of course.
So it will say win-win cooperation, but it's actually only one-way win, which is for China.
So recently, what are the triggers that China has imposed on India in terms of different implications that they've been doing against us?
So if you just look at the first 2 months of March, we are in March 2024, there's a series of events which have happened. Prime Minister Modi went to Arunachal Pradesh, which is Indian territory, and he unveiled a lot of defense infrastructure and the Sela tunnel, which increases our capabilities in the Kameng district in particular in Arunachal Pradesh, which is close to the LAC. Now China came up with a statement that it deplores Indian Prime Minister's visit to the state of Arunachal Pradesh. They call it Southern Tibet. India rubbished it, of course, and our Ministry of External Affairs said that basically China has no locus standi on this because it's an Indian territory. Now, it didn't end over there. The statement was on March 12th. On March 13th, it did a couple of things. First, it made a statement on Maldives, trying to provoke more problems between India and Maldives. It said that China supports Maldives' right to have its own decisions and to frame its own or to defend its own sovereignty. Positioning Maldives against India as if India is attacking Maldivian sovereignty. If we had to, we would have done it a long time ago. It's not happened. This is factually incorrect. But it was a very clever and clear jibe at India. Their foreign ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin had said this. And it was in response to a question about, India's defense personnel leaving Maldives. So it was a jibe at India to increase India's problems in the neighborhood. First was that. Then again on March 13th, they come up with a statement. And this is in the realm of economics. And their state-run Global Times says that, India should not engage in protectionism against Chinese products because India is going to fail, as if China has all the predictions ready, and it's just going to be futile. Constant threats. If you want us to be cooperative and engage your cooperation even in economics, using threats doesn't work. This sort of a behavior takes place only when the other country is seen as inferior. One doesn't go and threaten the other country and say, do this, unless you see yourself as being, superior or trying to psychologically influence the other country. So China has been doing all of these games, and I was just reading the news today before coming here. They're engaging in more war exercises along the NSC. So this is just 2 weeks in March. So having China as a neighbor is a constant headache and a problem for India. India has tried cooperation with China in multiple realms through different epochs in history. And I'm not even talking about bhai-bhai. If you just look at the time when Beijing Olympics was happening before the Russia-Ukraine war, Western countries were boycotting the Beijing Olympics and saying that we will not be sending, our representatives. Now, India shouldn't have sent its troops, or so India shouldn't have sent its representative, not because of human rights and all of these things, but because we were in an active conflict with China. But as a sign of friendship, just to extend another hand of friendship, we did send a team of players. Right? How did China repay us? Their mascot for the Beijing Olympics was Chief Apa, who you can see in open sources, videos, etc., martyring our Indian Army soldiers at Galwan. This is how we got repaid yet again. Every single time we extend a hand of cooperation, thinking that let bygones be bygones. Let's try cooperation again. We get a slap every single time. And this is because of that positional rivalry which I talked about. This is because of the perceptional problem. This is because of China's need to keep India under its thumb and use it only against the West or to get global South to its own side.
Coming back to the perceptional problems, there are a lot of narratives in China for their people to be known about. One of them is the century of humiliation. Would you want to share a little more about that?
See, China was it was the powerful Middle Kingdom, and there were various sorts of dynasties, and going into that sort of ancient history will take too much of time. But yes, China was a formidable player, just the way India also was. And there were a lot of kingdoms which used to pay tributes to the Chinese emperor. A lot of Southeast Asian countries, as we know them now, which were kingdoms back then, also paid tributes. Korea did, Japan did, and so on. But then, because of the imperialists and Western imperialists' desire to colonize, opium trade started happening slowly and steadily. Their experience with colonialism was a little different from ours, because there were at least 7 to 8 countries which had divided China into different spheres of influence. And these included even Russia, Japan, even the US for that matter, Germany, and each country or each imperialist country had carved out a sphere. The powers of the Qing dynasty were completely diminished. Nationals from these countries had a free hand to do whatever they wanted to. The culture of the Chinese people was completely eroded. The treasury was completely eroded, and it suffered colonization. We understand what colonization can do. China also went through that. So from
Who were the key colonizers in?
first Britain, of course, because Britain is the key colonizer everywhere. There's an India angle here. They were forcing Indian farmers to grow opium, and they were trading opium with, with the Chinese, forcing opium onto them, and getting silver out of them or getting tea out of them, and draining their coffers basically. When that thirst for more money and more wealth from China didn't end, they unleashed opium wars. There were two opium wars, which, the Qing dynasty, which they had to fight with the British, and they couldn't hold ground because the colonizers, they had their industrial revolution, they had artillery and all those sorts of things. There was also France, there was Portugal, there was Germany, there was US, there was Japan, there was Russia. So, and all of these countries basically had carved China into different spheres of influence, so that each of these colonizer has its own sphere where it can do whatever it wants to. They made China or the Qing dynasty sign a lot of humiliating treaties. During the First World War, the Chinese civil society back then had hoped that, they would get back their territories, because the Western powers seemed to talk about equality, justice, etc. But Chinese territories were not being given back to them. It was just passing on from one imperialist to the other. So this is something which has been with them forever, because it was humiliating for them. The Middle Kingdom getting reduced to this. Now, here's the difference between India and China. When China, did become the PRC, or the PRC was formed on 1st of October 1949, Mao Zedong said that basically they need to clean the house before inviting new guests. Basically, they meant that all the previous treaties, which were signed by the nationalist government, by the KMT with other countries, other powers, all would be revoked. And everything would be started afresh, anew, right? And in this context, they had talked about India being tied to the apron strings of its colonial masters. Why? Our experience was, or what we understood was that, well, okay, we've been colonized, it's been a terrible thing. But should we, just we take the example of the railways, the longest railways networks in the world, should we go physically remove all the railways because it's a sign of colonization? It was our resources, our people who laid the railways down. So we will use them. We have the longest constitution in the world. We modeled it on, a lot of Western countries because we thought, yeah, this is the way forward. This is the governance structure. We kept English, and in the list of 26 official languages that we have till date, English is right at the top. We don't have a national language. So we thought that whatever has happened has happened. Let's utilize whatever remains and the good out of it and move forward. We joined the Commonwealth as well, because we thought that, okay, now this is the new world order and this is a new century, so it's going to be different. China's way was different. They kept, their Chinese language intact. They didn't let any sort of Western influences creep in. They revoked all sorts of treaties with the earlier governments and etc. So which is why India and China have been so different. And we've had different impacts precisely because of this in the international system. India doesn't talk about century of humiliation. Why? Because the fact is we also did suffer. Because of the partition of Bengal, because of the artificially orchestrated famine, a lot of our people died. More than the Holocaust in Germany. But we don't make films out of them.
Yeah.
We don't have a series of literature on them, etc. Because probably the assumption was, let's look forward.
True.
Let's think of the future. Let's think how to do things. So which is why we don't dwell on history. China dwells on history, utilizes it to create certain sorts of narratives and to position itself in certain ways. Because of the century of humiliation, now it says that it's a post-colonial society. It knows how bad colonization is. And it uses it to instigate countries from the global south against the West. I am not saying that the West is guilt-free. They've been terrible. And it's because of the West that China is now being looked upon as a savior by a lot of these formerly colonized countries. China uses that historical narrative very smartly and clearly. We do not, because we don't have this sort of a malicious intent in foreign policy. So this is how, they have a century of humiliation. We've had centuries of humiliation.
True.
2 centuries of humiliation. We were also the Sone ki Chidiya. We don't talk about all that. Just different perspectives.
Right. Another narrative that is really famous in China is one of an expansionist nation. Which are the other countries that face the problem of the Chinese expansion?
14 countries. It has either land or maritime disputes with 14 countries. Land disputes with India and Bhutan. Bhutan doesn't officially recognize the PRC. But China comes up with these narratives that, historically, it's had 5,000 years of history and it has had control over these areas, etc. There is no evidence. At best, when they say 5,000 years of history, they talk about oracle bones. Oracle bones are not real evidence. These can be created. Other countries don't do it because it's hilarious. It's very childish, to be precise. So India and Bhutan, of course, land boundary disputes. Then in the South China Sea, plethora of ASEAN countries. There's Vietnam, there's Philippines. Philippines of late has been standing up a lot to the Chinese aggression. So China's it utilizes and misutilizes history. It says that, look, a lot of these countries used to pay us tributes. So they're part of, look, even if you say that the ancient Chinese kingdom used to be formidable and these kingdoms used to kowtow and used to pay tributes, the fact is there was something called the Treaty of Westphalia, which was signed in 1648, which became the basis for the modern nation state, in which sovereignty and the concept of a country becomes important. Country is not equal to a kingdom. Country is not equal to a nation. A nation is more, it's more imaginary and it's based on more historical perception, etc. But a country is based on sacrosanct sovereign boundaries. We are in an era where we have sacrosanct boundaries. We are not kingdoms anymore, So China somehow fails to understand that. Maybe consciously it does that. It is expansionist. Now, since I've lived in China for a while and I can speak, read and write the language as well, if you look at their maps, not the maps that disputed maps they come up with once in a while, but as a student, as a practitioner, if you do live there and you're studying IR, may heavens forbid, if you are studying IR, you will see a lot of maps in which Chinese territory includes territory right up to Assam. China officially does not claim Assam. Why is it that in their maps inside their country, Assam is shown? So this is a very clear-cut vision or an understanding of what they are going to do in the future. If like fools we were to stop being rational and we give up our sovereignty and say, okay, for the sake of peace, we will give up Aksai Chin and Arunachal Pradesh. May that never happen. But if we even were to do that, their territorial appetite is not going to end.
No.
If you look at the disinformation that they spread about India, they also try to poke Manipuris into believing that they should rather push the Indian state to give up Manipur and Manipur should be a part of China. Why is this there? If there was no basis, and Chinese social media is not like democratic countries' social media. It's highly monitored. If there is something which is not palatable to the state, it won't be out. These narratives have been out for years. Why have they been out? This is a clear-cut sign of the ambitions China has. It's an aggressive nation which has unending territorial appetite. Having disputes with one or two countries, okay, maybe understandable. But with so many countries, it just shows how aggressive China's mindset is and how difficult it is to, have like a proper conversation with China, mutually and actually respecting each other's values.
Since you spoke about China's ambition, what according to you are their long-term plan? What are their main objectives while doing all these things?
They, of course, want to be the most dominant player in international relations. They've made it very clear multiple times. The US is the primary threat, followed by Japan. With Japan, there's a historical reason as well. Japan at one point used to pay a sort of tribute to the Chinese emperor. But then there was something called the Meiji Restoration in Japan, through which Japan strengthened itself militarily and economically and unleashed all sorts of aggression on China. So now that was a bit too much for China or the Chinese kingdom to digest or the Qing Empire to digest, because this was a kingdom which was once kowtowing to China. So, which is why it is unpalatable. Now, the Imperial Japanese Army also, unleashed a lot of unfortunate things on China. We cannot deny that. There was a Nanjing rape, the Nanjing massacre, all sorts of things were done by the Imperial Japanese Army. But that being said, Japan also renounced the war after World War II ended. And in its constitution, it has said that it will never, go back to what it was during the imperial times. Times have changed. Japan actually preserves peace. It's only because now China is poking Japan constantly that Japan has reworked something that it used to call Article 10. And it also says that, well, for defensive purposes, we will also be prepared. China constantly keeps seeing Japan as a threat. The first threat is
The US.
the US, second is Japan.
And the third power that I see is Russia, but they are, I think, in a synergic
Russia has
relationship.
become, unfortunately, at the moment, it's become a junior partner to China because of the Russia-Ukraine war. Unfortunately, it's a junior partner to China. Even though it's been a great friend to India, the fact is that, because of the common threat from the West, which both China and Russia face, they've decided to partner up, and Russia is okay at the moment, seemingly, to be a junior partner. With regards to India, even though it tries to give us this imagery that India is inferior, it's a sort of a psychological warfare to keep us unprepared. They've done this to us in the past as well, and they are doing it now. But the thing is, if you look at Chinese military doctrines, even if you go back to this one particular doctrine from 2011, there is a fear of something they called Lian Suo Fanning, or chain reaction, that there might be a two-front war, Taiwan and India. So that fear is there. And all said and done, it's been only the Indian army which has held the PLA down. When, last year, some of our former armed forces officers did go to Taiwan, and there were some closed door meetings, etc., China flared up. So if we are really that inferior, China shouldn't be flaring up, right? Every time there's a meeting between heads of states of US and India and US, be it Howdy Modi, Namaste Trump, or Biden Modi meeting, and so on, you'll see a barrage of comments from China. Why? If we are really that inferior, it should be affected. Coming to the economic realm, when Galwan happened, there was also simultaneously, on the day that, our soldiers were martyred, simultaneously there were 40,000 attacks on our cyberspace, most of which got tracked back to China. India had to defend itself because now the battleground has moved from the physical space also into the cyberspace.
Right.
So we understood the threats which all these Chinese apps possess, and we started with TikTok, which now even Western countries are mulling over, etc. But we did it way back in 2020. And at first, when there were these murmurings that India will ban TikTok, China first laughed, and its state-controlled Global Times said that, oh, India is not even an important market. What will it do? But when we did it, then it started threatening us. We will drag you to WTO because this is not fair trade, etc. So if we are really not that important, why do you have to threaten us? It's a very clever, smart ploy. Showcase to us that we are inferior so that we feel inferior. We keep getting deceived. But at the same time, there is a threat that India has a potential, India will rise. And right now, from the ways in which I see it, China's economy is tanking. It has tanked already. India, touch wood, has a good reputation in international relations, all said and done. We have partners with like-minded countries, which China unfortunately does not. India has a better reputation than China, even in the global south. These sorts of attacks from China are only going to increase in the near future.
I want to shift the focus into the South China Sea and the Taiwan elections that are due. And the conflict that is looming around Taiwan as well. Do you want to put some clarity in that?
Sure. So, see, the South China Sea is a very important arena both for China and for India. About 67% of China's total trade passes through that region. For US, it's not so important because 14% of its total trade passes through that region. For India, it's 55%. So it's an important region for us. If there is a flashpoint, if China does something to block the trade routes, it matters for us. Because at the moment, we are trying to leverage our economic growth rates, our trade, etc. So South China Sea, any crisis there would be a problem. As opposed to the earlier epochs of history, where we didn't want to provoke China, even by saying some things, of late we have started saying at least, and stating in very clear-cut terms, China's actions in the South China Sea are not palatable. At the 15th East Asia Summit, our EM Dr. Jaishankar had said this, that China's actions in the South China Sea do not adhere to the rule, to the accepted norms of law or accepted rules for ensuring stability and peace. And we have been very vocal about the South China Sea because it matters to us. Secondly, it's not just economics. We also adhere to a rules-based international order. Now, if in China it can force its way through and acquire territories, rejecting all sorts of existing norms and laws, and we don't say anything to it, how should we expect that anyone would say anything when it does the same to us on our boundaries? So South China Sea clearly is very, very important for us. With regards to Taiwan, India-Taiwan relations are really booming at the moment. On our Republic Day, we even conferred, the Bharat Ratna on Yang Liu, who's the chairperson of Foxconn, showing that, we value this partnership. Taiwan is actively seeking to move its reliance away from China, and a lot of its semiconductor industries are setting up bases in India. I think just 2 days ago, Prime Minister Modi has set the stone in Dholera in Gujarat for a semiconductor manufacturing capacity. And it's being done by the Tatas, my city, which I initially mentioned, Jamshedpur. Taiwan is looking at partnerships with India. We have a de facto Taiwanese embassy in New Delhi. We are opening, we also have one de facto consul general in Mumbai. We're opening it up in Chennai. We have a de facto Indian embassy called India-Taipei Association in Taiwan as well. We've recently signed this Labor Mobility Pact with Taiwan, wherein they are seeking to get 100,000 laborers from India, because Taiwan is an aged society. For any country to economically develop further, you need the youth. India has the positive demographics. India has the youngest population in the world, which is why this sort of mobility is also happening. And we are cooperating in science and tech, STEM, and so on. As I said, we also, our former armed forces members did go to Taiwan last year. They had some closed door discussions. Even, in all sorts of multilateral discussions, we have been talking to Taiwan. So we see Taiwan as an important partner. Now, China forces the world to adhere to the One China policy. We also adhere to the One China policy. And as I said, we were the first non-communist country to recognize the PRC, which essentially meant that we gave up the recognition of Taiwan back then. That being said, since 2008, in our official documents, we have not mentioned the One China policy. We also have our own mechanisms of diplomacy, and sometimes, silence also says a lot of things. So we have never mentioned the One China policy since 2008 onwards, and we are increasing our ties with Taiwan. Elections happened this year in Taiwan in January. There was a lot of disinformation which China churned out to affect the electorate in Taiwan, and there was an India angle. Since November last year, a lot of Chinese handles have been pushing out this disinformation that the DPP government, which was in power and which is in power right now, is seeking to destabilize the Taiwanese society because it's getting 100,000 Indian laborers all at one go. First of all, back in November, this agreement wasn't even signed. This imaginary number of 100,000, back then it was just imaginary. And they were bringing in India. And they put out very racist stereotypes against Indians, saying that if you get so many Indian men, 100,000 laborers, your women will not be safe. And they pushed out this narrative in Taiwan. And of course, the Taiwanese also, for whatever reasons, they also amplified this. And this became an election issue, that the DPP is going to destabilize the society by getting in Indians. So which is why from December onwards, there was a lull on this Labour Mobility Pact till the elections didn't get over. But as soon as the elections were over, the DPP came back for the third term, unprecedented third term, and the Labour Mobility Pact was signed. Now, in all these disinformation, there was only the stereotypes which Chinese have against India and Indians, that was pushed out. Secondly, what was also pushed out was that China is a better player or a better partner for Taiwan than India. You should stop looking at India. Clearly, the partnership between India and Taiwan is not very palpable to China. But it doesn't matter to us anymore, because as opposed to the earlier epochs of history where we tried everything to cooperate with them, slowly and steadily the understanding has now seeped in that China doesn't want us as a true partner. It just says friend. Words and actions don't match at all. Taiwan would be a better partner. And yes, Taiwan is the manufacturing hub of all semiconductors. Conductors are the most important things in the world.
Right.
So why not?
So why are we speculating a conflict between China and Taiwan?
Because China multiple times has tried to, forcibly take back Taiwan. In history, there was a civil war between two parties, the Communist Party of China and the Kuomintang, the nationalist parties. And the communists won. The nationalists or the KMT had no choice but to flee to Taiwan, where they established Republic of China, or Taiwan as they call it now. But then over the years, inside of Taiwan, there have been other parties also which have come up. Besides the KMT, now there is the DPP also, there are independent candidates also, etc. China has always said that there is just one China. There is only People's Republic of China, which is the true China. Republic of China is not the true China, it's just a part of China. So over the years, they have tried to forcibly take back Taiwan. There have been at least 3 Taiwan Straits crises, in which China has tried to use force. Taiwan has stood its ground, sometimes with the help of external partners like the US, sometimes on its own. After the Nancy Pelosi visit, there was a lot of aggression around the Taiwan Straits, and China was trying to unleash psychological warfare on Taiwan all over again. And after the Russia-Ukraine war, the fears inside of Taiwan have increased. That, maybe China will also get inspired by the Russian style of invasion, and they're going to do the same to Taiwan. Fortunately, that hasn't happened so far. But as China's powers, or, well, not really powers, but as China's aggressive appetite keeps increasing, this will happen. Eventually there's going to be an attempt to fully conquer Taiwan. Xi Jinping has said it in his statements multiple times. Even at the 20th Party Congress speech, he had talked about regional wars. What is the region China is? What could be the regional wars? India, of course, and Taiwan. So he has talked about it. They have been prepping up their military. Even before elections, multiple PLA ships were seen inside Taiwan waters. Taiwan's Ministry of Defense talked about it. There were a lot of rockets which were seen, aircrafts which were seen from the Chinese side. So China does want to take it over. It wants Taiwan to just give in and, say that, yeah, we are fully one, we are part of the PRC. The world keeps fearing that there is going to be a full-fledged conflict. It's not going to be very well for us, for India. Other countries, well, yes, Philippines would be in the vicinity, Japan would be there, but it's not going to be really good for India as well.
So US had a massive part in Chinese growth. We could say that.
Yes.
What are their relations at the moment? How do you see US and China trying to leverage each other's power?
The relations are definitely not normal, but the two also understand that they need each other. We live in a world in which, economics is very important. For trade, China needs the US and the US needs China. Last year there was also this meeting between Biden and Xi Jinping. Why did the meeting have to happen despite the fact that relations are so tense? US is clearly supporting the NATO forces and Ukraine. Whereas even though China is showcasing that at the UN it is very, it's not taking a side, it is very clear from Chinese statements that it's on the side of Russia. So US and China are clearly on two different sides. With regards to Taiwan also, the two are completely on different sides. Even with regards to India, the two are on completely different sides. Last year, the US did pass a statement saying that Arunachal is an integral part of India. The only country in the world who has done that. So even on India, US and China are completely apart. But there are a lot of, this is elections year for the US, for Biden. And every political person wants to stay in power. There are a lot of Americans of Chinese origin in the US. If you would have seen footage from last year when Xi Jinping went there were scores of Chinese flags which were being waved. These were by, American citizens of Chinese origin. They are a vote bank, of course. How do you leverage them? Right now, do you showcase that you're completely against their once upon a time motherland? That wouldn't work well for a political person. But at the same time, US cannot backtrack from its whole claim that it upholds a value-based order, a liberal international order, and so on, which is why it is at loggerheads with China. It's a very difficult relationship. But the two realize that they need each other, which is why Secretary Janet Yellen had gone to China last year. What is the need? And her body language was very bizarre, which showcased that she is in. Somehow it was read as she was showcasing herself as being inferior to the Chinese. Why? Both need each other. They understand that, but both also want to be the leaders of the international system. US will not be happy if China is the leader of the international system. May heavens forbid that ever happens. It's not going to be very good for us. And China wants to be the leader of the international system. It wants to be the most powerful country. It wants to be the middle kingdom, which it was once upon a time. In this year, you will see a lot of peculiar things happening because politics. And in democracies, political people want to stay in power.
So, because of, again, like I said, the US had a great reason for China to grow in terms of a capitalist kind of mindset. Would you call China capitalist now, or do you still call them a communist?
So China says it follows socialism with Chinese characteristics. The socialism bit is only in the politics bit. There's just one. It's a one-party state, right? And all the political control is in the hand of Xi Jinping and the CPC. But in terms of economics, yes, there have been market forces which have been allowed. You see Chinese consumers having all sorts of Gucci's and Pradas and all sorts of things. All of these, MNCs have made a huge mark in China, and a lot of them are reaping benefits from the Chinese market. The US definitely wanted the Chinese market after Deng Xiaoping started the reforms and opening up. In fact, it was the US which got China into the WTO, and now China flouts all the rules of the WTO. And US is, of course, not happy. But it was the US which got China into the WTO.
Right.
US wanted the Chinese markets. US capitalists or US players wanted the Chinese market. If I were to really do an objective analysis, if China is socialism with Chinese characteristics, I would say it's capitalism with Chinese characteristics.
Right. So China is quite superior to India at the moment in different sectors, be it the economy, be it the military. What is it we can learn from them and improve as a nation?
So, given the fact that we are very different in our governance structures, there's not much that we can do which China did. The way China could set up SEZs overnight. We can't do that. We've had Nandigram and Singur. We can't have that. We are a democracy. There are a lot of other things which we have to factor in. China can pay its laborers extremely low wages and get away with it. We can't, because we have checks and balances. What can we learn? Yeah, maybe the working culture. Because the Chinese working culture, they're hard, the Chinese people, the common people, are generally very hardworking and very disciplined. Well, Indians, maybe it's a stereotype, maybe it's not. We are seen as being very bright and sharp and innovative. But unfortunately, we also take longer time periods to complete things. So maybe the working culture would be one thing which I would really aspire that my country also copies from that. Maybe the long-term planning, which under this government is happening. We do have plans for up to 2042, etc. But I wish we had this sort of a planning the way China does. China plans 100 years ahead. And it has small things, and it has everything planned out in different realms, economics, military, cyber, AI, etc. I wish we were a little bit more organized like that for the sake of our own good. Otherwise, we can't put people in concentration camps like they do or use them as forced labor. We cannot do that. We are a vibrant democracy. As exemplified during G20, we are the mother of democracy. We can't go the same way as China is going. But yeah, maybe in some aspects of culture, maybe we could be more hardworking. Maybe we could be long-term planners.
That is very true.
And maybe we should remember our history a little bit more. We forgive very easily. Maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's bad. But when we've been struck again and again and again and again and again, we need to remember that.
Absolutely.
Maybe we need to have a better sense of history and memory.
India is at a very similar position as to what China was when they had opened doors to all the industrialization, for instance, and globalization as well. So we were 10 to 15 years late as China. Is that a good thing for us that we could see the growth similar to China now?
You know, earlier when as a child I heard slow and steady wins the race, I used to think it's just a story. But slow and steady does win the race. For us, first and foremost, the thing is, we will have to take care of our own domestic population. Catching up with the West, China had these whole policies during Mao Zedong's time that it's going to catch up with the US and UK in 5 and 10 years each. We never had those sorts of mindsets.
Aspirations, yeah.
We don't need to catch up. We don't need to prove to the world. We don't need validation from the world. Because for us, our own citizens matter first. So our governance, our economics has to be first for our citizens. Which is why even under this government, you will see that we are trying to leverage foreign policy to unleash growth for our own economy.
True.
There could have been one way in which we could have become like China. We should have become autocratic. Then maybe all these policy jams that we have in the parliament, maybe that wouldn't have happened. But here is a little story or an anecdote which I want to bring in. It's in a humorous way, but it conveys a lot of things about governance structures. India-China border, there are two dogs who meet. One is an Indian dog and one is a Chinese dog. Now the Indian dog is skinny, scruffy, has worms, is itching, right? But is barking constantly that my owners have done this wrong to me. This is not okay by me. This is not acceptable. Then the dog, it sees the Chinese dog, which is very well fed. It has gleaming fur. It's got a leash which has diamonds on it, but it's way too tight on the neck. And it has a gag on its mouth. So it can't even bark. Barking is a natural thing, right? Which every dog does. So the Indian dog goes immediately and it takes off the gag. And it looks at the Chinese dog and says, hey, how can you live this way? And the Chinese dog looks at the Indian dog and says, how can you live this way? So the question which was posed to me was, would you want to live with a gag wherein you can't change things? Or would you want to live as a scruffy dog but which is still screaming and can change things by screaming? So I was like, no, I think I would still want to be in a situation wherein I still have the right to freedom of speech and expression and I can utilize all the tools of democracy to make changes for my own betterment. Because I can become like the Chinese dog if only I can speak that way.
Wow, such a great perspective that was.
So it was quite good. So yeah, we were slow. But slow and steady wins the race. It's not like we are looking to win against China in some sort of a race. But yes, our growth has been more long-term, more sustainable. We have looked at different sort of sectors. If you just look, we had the milk revolution. Why? Why did we need to have the milk revolution or the green revolution? Because our citizens come first. It's good that, because of this approach, this great potential and the strengths that we have, that we are now finally taking off. We still have a lot of ground to cover and there are plans. So, and we're going to do things in a very different way from China. So, and it's going to be the Indian way.
This subject is such that is so critical at the moment. And I can go on with my questions with you, especially with you, because you have such wealth of knowledge in the subject of China. And this conversation has been really insightful for me as well to learn a lot more that I didn't know about the Indo-China relations. But I think I will end this conversation. I always end my conversation with two personal questions that I ask my guests. The first question is not in the subject of China. Since this podcast is called Diary of a Publisher, what is one book that you wish you would have read earlier in life?
Bertil Lintner's book, China's India War. I did read it, but I wish I had read it long ago because there's a narrative which China has pushed out. And sorry, I've gone back into China, but my favorite books are all
definitely
China related.
Tell us more about it.
They're all China related. But yeah, there was a narrative which has been pushed out constantly by China that India is always the aggressor. But then Bertil Lintner does such an excellent work in tracking all the different ways in which China has been the aggressor, not just at the military front, but also training a lot of terrorists from India's northeast. I wish I had read it earlier. I read it a little too late.
Nice. Is there any other book that you wish, in terms of life, learnings about life, that you would want to share?
Unfortunately, I'm just such a non-fiction sort of book, and even in non-fiction, I read only China-related books.
About international relations.
Yes, but there is one book which I I talk about very often even to my students. It's about 3 generations of women. It's called Wild Swans by Zhang Chang. The grandmother or the first is a concubine, and she has a very sad life, and she's expecting a child, and she's on the run. She doesn't want to be captured by the emperor. She doesn't want to part with her child and give it away to the emperor. Of course, and her feet are bound. So you can't even run fast, because when foot binding used to happen, basically your foot would be broken. So she runs and she runs and runs, and thankfully, the PRC, or the People's Republic of China, is formed. There is monarchy doesn't exist, and she gives birth in a jungle, and she has a daughter. And the daughter is growing up during Mao Zedong's time, and she's all for revolution, etc. And there's this big slogan, "Women hold up half the sky," etc. So she's like really happy, and she's like, "I'm going to do everything for my country," etc. But soon she realizes as to how slogans are just slogans. Because when she was expecting with her first child, it was so militaristic under Mao Zedong, and it was so much of politics in command, that she was told that she can't even take leave. There was no concept of maternity leave. So she had to work in the fields, on the ground, etc., as construction workers, as a farmer, etc., with that huge belly. So there was a miscarriage. And she's heartbroken, she's angry. And she's like, all of this is a facade. So next time that she is expecting, she's on the run, just like her mother. And she's running and she's running and she's running. And then she goes to the countryside, and she sees everything which Mao says is just a narrative. He has a huge palace while people are starving to death. And he also, unfortunately, exploits women. And she is angry that, did I really do all this just for my country? And anyway, so she has a child, and then that year, Mao Zedong passes away. The child who is born is Zhang Chang, the author of this book. She's a US citizen. The book is banned in China. Even though it is a real life story, it's written in the way of, fiction would be written.
Right.
And it's got a lot of life lessons as to how do you, when you are in such a difficult scenario, in a situation, what do you really do? You are running, you are on the run. Life gives you lemons, and it's not always possible to make lemonade out of it. What do you really do? 3 different generations of women, and they've done it in their own different ways. So that's another book I really like.
Beautiful. My second personal question, and the last of today's conversation, is what advice would Dr. Sriparna Pathak would give to 20-year-old Dr. Pathak?
To my 20-year-old self, okay, I would say to myself that you are building a great mix of being excellent in your personal and professional life. Stick to the path. Don't divert, because if you stick to this path, 20 years later, the benefits you'll get are humongous. Don't divert at all.
Beautiful, ma'am. Again, thank you so much for this opportunity to converse with you. This has been an insightful one for me, and I'm sure it's going to be for the audience as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much once again, Shivam.
If you enjoyed the episode or got some value out of it, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Until then, keep reimagining yourself and know that the power of change lies within you.